Welcome to M3 of USS2105 Knowledge and Society. So my name is Joel Chow, and in this video I will cover some of the overarching theme of this module and also introduce the basic mechanics of the class. So what is this class about? As the title suggests, the primary idea of this module is that knowledge is social. Now, that might sound to some of you as a very familiar and not very odd idea. But it also might sound to some of you as a pretty odd idea. What does it mean that knowledge is social? But the thing that I want to stress throughout all of this module is that both reactions, in a way, make sense. So one of the reasons why we tend to think of the idea as knowledge as social as strange is because traditionally philosophers and other scholars have primarily focused their attention on gaining or discovering knowledge in individualistic terms, right? And this makes sense, especially when we think about how we can improve our decision making or our rational processes or our rationality in general by one of the simplest ways, by correcting for individual biases or by testing our hypotheses in line with relevant data and evidence. Now, these are very important mechanisms for improving the way we learn and discover about the world, right? In fact, this is why you will look at this in greater detail in another module, right, taught by Dr. Charles Burke. So of course, correcting for individual cognitive biases is very important, right? That is how, as individuals, a lot of the time we can improve on our own individual decision making and our own learning and thinking about the world, as I've already mentioned. But as you will see, cognitive biases also have a social dimension that is important to consider. And sometimes, in certain cases, it might be that even though reasoners or inquirers are not biased, still, because of certain kind of social effects and group dynamics, you might end up that the group cannot get to more accurate beliefs, right? But at the same time, as we will see, group dynamics also are essential for helping us to get to more accurate beliefs. So there's a sort of tension that we will explore more carefully. But back to why we tend to think of the idea that knowledge is social as strange. Another example comes in our popular imagination about inquiry. So I want you to consider for a second a significant breakthrough or discovery in science or your field of study. What comes to your mind? What is in your mental picture? For me, as a philosopher, right, one of the first things that comes to mind is an image of a philosopher conversing with someone in the style of Socrates or Confucius. Other images that come to mind are some of the philosophers that have made significant advances in my field, such as Angela Davis, Philippa Foot, or John Rawls. Do similar images appear in your head? Do you see, say, Karl Marx, Barbara Liskov, Terence Tao, Einstein, Bill Gates, Jack Ma, William Shakespeare, Margaret Mead, bell hooks, or maybe Prof. Kang in your mental picture? Of course, you might imagine other things, but I think it's fair to say that for some of us, we tend to imagine at least some towering individuals that have made significant contributions to our field, right? As the famous metaphor notes, in learning, we stand on the shoulders of giants, using the understanding of major thinkers who have gone before us to make intellectual progress, right? So this idea that we rely on individuals with a certain kind of unique drive or vision or insight to make significant advances is a pretty common trope and way of thinking about inquiry. But while this picture of inquiry might be attractive to many people, it is, I think, incomplete in one important sense. Note that most inquiry takes place in groups, or at least between two people. So in my own examples, Socrates and Confucius often took themselves to be learning from their interlocutors. That's why they engage in so much philosophical conversation with other people, right? Especially Socrates. But Confucius also believed very strongly that in teaching his disciples, he was actually also learning more about himself and also how to be a good person. So today, most, and I dare say almost all, scientific discoveries take place in labs where people work in groups. And even when these groups make some kind of discovery, right, they only discover a smaller piece of the larger puzzle. And they have to work and collaborate with other groups to fit together, all together, the pieces of the puzzle, right? And they often do this through sharing information, understanding each other's data, and so on and so forth. And we'll talk about this in greater detail throughout this module. For now, I just want to give you a sort of rough picture of how much inquiry is actually social. Now, the same is true also of work in the humanities and the social sciences, right? Researchers have to collaborate with one another and often discuss and evaluate findings together. And finally, the classroom is a perfect example. Learning and discovery take place in the classroom are inherently social, right? Which is why in this current moment where a lot of teaching has to take place online, we currently face a question of how can we ensure and continue to reach the standards of teaching that we want, given that our typical means of interaction, face-to-face communication and interaction, have been significantly curtailed, right? Or in this case, almost completely absent. But let's get to this point later. Let's return to the sort of broader idea that I want you to think about throughout this module. So this module really is about this question, right? If learning or inquiry, as we shall just talk about it broadly, is a social activity, how do social forces and social norms shape inquiry? How can we best organize our learning and inquiring communities? Now, before we examine this question in a bit more detail, I want to take a small detour to explain why I'm interested in exploring this question together with you. So, as I already sort of mentioned briefly, I'm a philosopher by profession and by training. I'm also, by the way, a full-time caregiver to this little pup here named Miku. And keep your eyes peeled for her, you never know when she will appear in my videos. So I have, in general, a few research interests, but a primary and continuing research interest is an interest in understanding how social structures and norms shape our understanding of the world and also our interactions with one another. So this interest actually grew during my undergraduate days, right? And specifically, it was my time at the USP, which was essential towards developing this interest. So during my time at the USP, I picked up, I believe, 3 essential skills and lessons. First, I learned how to interact with individuals from a variety of backgrounds and especially disciplinary and methodological backgrounds. And I think that this has been an invaluable skill in thinking about different research pathways and also in the workplace, where you often have to interact with different individuals with different skill sets. So this was one sort of key lesson and skill that I've taken with me. Second, I've also learned how different disciplines interact and often generate new methodologies, new ways of discovering and interacting with the world, forms of knowledge, and in some cases, entirely new fields of study. So for example, right, while I was primarily trained as a philosopher in undergraduate studies, right, eventually when I went to graduate school, I have published and done research on an interdisciplinary field called philosophy, politics, and economics, right? And this kind of work, this kind of interdisciplinary work would not have been possible, I think, without my experiences in the USP. But most importantly, after I've spent some time away from USP and comparing my experiences in Australia, in the US and other departments, I've come to recognize the importance of creating, maintaining, and sustaining a healthy learning environment which can promote such interdisciplinary inquiry. Part of the goal of having the USP in a residential college, I believe, is that the aim is to see and to deliberately build and maintain this kind of learning and inquiring community. So why mention all of this? I think that one of the goals that I have for this module lab is to provide you with the first step towards achieving some of these goals, right? This is the beginning of your USP journey, right? And while you cannot accomplish all of these goals, obviously, within one semester, this module lab itself wants to help you develop and take that first step towards doing those things, right? In fact, you should think of USS as this in general as this kind of first step. Specifically, right, hopefully you will learn how to read and evaluate certain texts and arguments, right? So you won't be doing that much reading, but you will be thinking about sort of big arguments, big ideas, and how can you sort of begin to evaluate, understand them, and also you will be learning how to interact with your classmates and work together to integrate perspectives to have novel insights or apply some of these ideas to different areas. So how will we achieve all of these goals? First, through structured in-class activities, right? The backbone of USP teaching is seminar-style teaching, right? Where students and faculty are in dialogue with one another, right? Second, you work in groups, right? You learn from one another what you understand about the material and also learn how to communicate with one another and begin to apply these concepts to different areas. Now, when we talk about in-class activities, especially during this semester, we must talk about the big elephant in the room, which is COVID-19. So, the spread of the coronavirus means that we have to switch to completely online learning. And while we often sort of talk about this in terms of some kind of disadvantages, I do think that there are some benefits worth considering and worth highlighting. So first of all, right, online learning means that learning is flexible, right? So you can watch this video anytime, anywhere. You can be watching it from the comfort of your bedroom, study, wherever, on the bus, right? And you can rewatch it if you so desire, right? If you want to rewind if you missed what I said, or you think that my jokes are very funny, you can again rewind and listen to the jokes that I made, right? Now, of course, in the classroom, you can say, oh, can you repeat what you said? That is helpful, right? But it also can be awkward and you might feel that it's disruptive to the class. Whereas rewinding a video is not disruptive at all, right? So there's a lot of flexibility built into online learning that I think we also should appreciate. And secondly, and most importantly, I think, right, the reason why we are doing this is that online learning contains the spread of COVID-19. Now, whatever its other disadvantages, this is very important to bear in mind, right? Because we want to build a learning community, but one of the sort of essential things to take note is that if everyone in the community is not safe, then no learning can viably take place, right? We must sort of have a physically safe environment in order for learning to be properly facilitated, right? So this is something which is obvious, but sometimes we just have to point out the obvious, right? But other than that, online learning also has other kinds of advantages, right? It allows us to engage students differently, right, through online medium, and sometimes there is more interactivity in the sense that we can participate to a wider number more easily, right? And students can also interact with one another through a variety of platforms. So that might actually enhance participation in some ways. But of course, we shouldn't paint a completely rosy picture of online learning. The lack of face-to-face interaction also means that certain things are not clearly expressed. So, to address this, at the end of each session, I will collate all questions either in the chat, on Zoom, or the discussion boards, and so on and so forth, and I will answer all of them in a blog post. And one important thing that I want to address is that during this time, your mental health might be adversely affected by COVID-19 and also by the safe distancing measures. So the theme of this module, as I've said, is that knowledge is social. And part of the reason why knowledge is social is that human beings, right, by nature, are social. We like to interact with one another, right? That also helps the spread of information, as we will see later on. But safe distancing measures often work against our human desires for interaction, right? This is, I think, everyone can see this quite plainly, right? So there are professional services available both in the university-wide and at the USP. And please do reach out if you are facing some issues. Or if you need to speak to someone informally, you can just reach out through email, and you can see it on the screen, or my Telegram handle. Now, the COVID-19 situation also means that we have to employ online technologies intelligently. So here are some of the platforms we will use. We will use Teams, Microsoft Teams, for sharing discussion resources and ideas, and we might also use it for the actual discussion sections, depending on how everyone feels comfortable with using Teams, because they have a few new features I think quite useful for facilitating pretty good discussions with a larger number of students. We'll use Telegram for communication and questions, and we'll also use Zoom, right, in case people are not comfortable with Microsoft Teams, right, for discussion sections or consultations. So that's all I have to say about the mechanics of the class. For more details about assessment or the course schedule, please go to Luminous. Now, before I go, I want to briefly turn to what we will learn in this class in terms of the big ideas that I've been talking about in general. So, we will look at 3 big ideas in the next 3 sessions. We'll begin session 1 with the first big one, epistemic dependence. Now, epistemic dependence sounds like a scary word, right? But in a nutshell, it just refers to the idea that we are often reliant on the testimony of others to learn and discover new things, something I've already sort of hinted at. To find out what this means exactly and how it affects the way we learn, you have to wait till next week. In the meantime, please take the time to listen to the podcast that I've linked on the syllabus, Hidden Brain, and think about how the social spread of beliefs both helps and hinder us in gaining more accurate beliefs. And surprise, here's a short clip of Miku doing her thing. See you soon.